Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir. I'd like to take a moment to share with you a traditional activity that was initiated just prior to the beginning of the ceremony, the lighting of the hulik, a traditional Inuit lamp. This lamp is used in the north to bring light and warmth to the home. We light the hulik to mark important events such as today's ceremony. We are grateful for the presence of Sally Webster, a Nanook elder from Baker Lake, who lit the hulik and will maintain its light and warmth throughout the ceremony. Nakurmik. J'aimerais maintenant prendre un moment pour vous présenter un élément traditionnel qui s'est tenu avant le début de cette cérémonie, l'allumage du hulik, la lampe traditionnelle inuite. Cette lampe est utilisée dans le Nord pour apporter lumière et chaleur à la demeure. Nous allumons le hulik lors d'événements importants comme la cérémonie aujourd'hui. Nous sommes reconnaissants de la présence de Sally Webster, une aînée inuite de Baker Lake, qui a allumé le hulik et qui veillera sur sa lumière et sa chaleur tout au long de la cérémonie. Nakurmik. As you entered the residence today, you walked through an art installation by Métis artist Tracy May Chambers. This crocheted installation evokes the struggles of Indigenous peoples and gives a voice to the true history of Canada. Her goal is to help bridge the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, while also addressing the decolonization of public spaces. We are honored to be part of the Artists' Hope and Healing Canada initiative. En entrant dans la résidence aujourd'hui, vous avez pu admirer une installation de l'artiste métisse Tracy May Chambers. Cette installation réalisée au crochet évoque les difficultés des peuples autochtones et donne une voix à la véritable histoire du Canada. Par cette œuvre, l'artiste cherche à rapprocher les peuples autochtones et non autochtones, tout en abordant la question de la décolonisation des espaces publics. C'est pour nous un privilège de faire partie de l'initiative Hope and Healing Canada de Madame Chambers. To officially begin our ceremony, I invite Algonquin Anishinaabe Elder Claudette Commanda to offer words of welcome. For over 30 years, Elder Commanda has promoted First Nations people, history, and culture as a student, educator, and advocate. Pour commencer officiellement notre cérémonie, j'invite l'aînée algonquine Anishinaabe Claudette Commanda à prononcer ces mots de bienvenue. Depuis plus de 30 ans, l'aînée Commanda fait la promotion des peuples, de l'histoire et de la culture des Premières Nations en tant qu'étudiante, éducatrice et défenseur.
Kwei kakina. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. Your Excellency, Prime Minister Trudeau, honorable ministers, distinguished guests, families, friends, and children. Miigwech ki bijaya goma nongum, pijaji goma Anishinaabe eki omama weneniwag. Je suis honneur pour partager avec vous la pierre. I'm always honored to welcome everyone to this beautiful homeland of the Algonquin people. I am honored to represent my nation and my community of Kitigan Zibi. So to each and every one of you beautiful people, welcome to this ancestral homeland of the Algonquin people. It is a beautiful day today, beautiful day. It's an exciting day. Let us put our hearts, let us put our spirit, let us put our voice together as one to give honor for this blessing of this day. Let us give that prayer in the way that we know, in the way that we understand, in the way that we believe. No one is left out in our circle of prayer. No one is left out in our circle of community. No one is left out in the circle of love. I honor myself before my ancestors, and I thank my ancestors for the beauty of their power, of their love, and their kindness to sustain our nation since time immemorial. I acknowledge the ancestors of Indigenous peoples from coast to coast to coast, as I acknowledge each and every one of you, your ancestors. Let us put our hearts, let us put our voice together as one to give acknowledgement, to thank the ancestors for being here today with each and every one of you. Miigwej ki jiminado ki chimigwej onje nongum. Miigwej ki jiminado onje kakina. Ki jiminado ki chimigwej. Miigwej onje jojo aki kokamista pekizis mi shomis kizis. Ni bok sendam ki jiminado ni bok sendam onje kakina widoko wadoduin. Ni bok sendam ki jiminado mashkawiziwin. Ni bok sendam ki jiminado onje kakina minopomadzuin zagieduin. Creator, as I honor you together with that one voice and that one spirit, we acknowledge you for the blessing of today. We thank you, Creator, for bringing everyone together. We thank you for life and this blessing. Creator, we acknowledge the land and the water. We acknowledge our grandmother, the moon, and our grandfather, the sun, and we acknowledge our mother, the earth. And Creator, my prayer for everyone who is here today, Creator, the leaders, bless them, Creator. Bless them, Creator, with kindness. Bless them, Creator, with strength. Bless them, Creator, with that wisdom and that knowledge. Bless them, Creator, with the greatest gift that you have given us, love. And may we show that love to one another, and may we show that love in the work that we do, and may we show that love in the title that we hold, and we come together as one for all the children, and that we love this land as we love this country, and we love the children, and what we do here today is always for the children today and tomorrow. Thank you, Creator. We thank you, Creator, for your love. Miigwej. Miigwej.
Thank you, Elder Commanda. Merci, Aîné Commanda. Mr. John Hannaford, Clerk of the Privy Council, will now seek the Governor-General's consent to proceed. Monsieur John Hannaford, greffier du Conseil privé, demandera maintenant à la gouverneure générale la permission de procéder.
Excellency, procéder. Excellency, may we proceed?
With the Governor-General's approval, we will now proceed with the swearing-in of members of the 29th Canadian Ministry. Maintenant que la gouverneure générale a signifié son approbation, nous procéderons à l'assermentation des membres du 29e Conseil des ministres canadiens. The ministers who are changing responsibilities or titles will please come forward to be sworn to office. Les ministres qui changent de responsabilité ou de titre sont priés de s'avancer pour prêter leur serment d'office. The Honourable Lawrence Macaulay, Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, was recently sworn into his new office during a private ceremony. We would like to congratulate him on his new role. Minister Macaulay. Minister Macaulay could not be with us this morning due to the passing of a family member. Our thoughts are with him at this time. L'Honorable Lawrence Macaulay, ministre de l'Agriculture et de l'Agroalimentaire, a récemment prêté serment lors d'une cérémonie privée. Nous souhaitons le féliciter pour son nouveau rôle. Le ministre Macaulay n'a pas pu être parmi nous ce matin en raison du décès de membres de sa famille. Nos pensées l'accompagnent en ce moment. L'Honorable Dominique Leblanc, ministre de la Sécurité publique, des institutions démocratiques et des affaires intergouvernementales. The Honorable Dominique Leblanc, Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs.
Moi, Dominique Leblanc, je promets et jure solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre de la Sécurité publique, des institutions démocratiques et des affaires intergouvernementales. Ainsi, Dieu me soit en aide. I, Dominic LeBlanc, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully and to the best of my skill and knowledge execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions, and Intergovernmental Affairs. So help me God.
Okay, I'd like to bring back in Adam Vaughan, former Liberal Member of Parliament. Tell us about the change here. Dominic LeBlanc taking over from Marco Mendicino, who most recently faced a lot of criticism for the transfer of Paul Bernardo.
Yeah, clearly taking over the public safety file and that one portfolio that got Marco Mendicino into trouble, but also retaining intergovernmental affairs. He has a very strong relationship with the premiers across the country, and then ties that into emergency preparedness, where climate change and the premiers and emergency responses are all having an impact. But he also retains the Chinese file as well and electoral interference. So he's a complex ministry he's running.
All right, let's listen once again.
Moi, Jean-Yves Duclos, je promets et déclare solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre des Services publics et de l'approvisionnement. I, Jean-Yves Duclos, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Jean-Yves Duclos taking over procurement. Tell us about this file for him.
Jean-Yves is a very competent, very quiet, very distinguished. I worked with him very closely. He's a wonderful person, and he is a professor, represents a riding in Quebec City that has a very narrow electoral margin, so he's important for that.
An important seat to have in cabinet. Then.
Piece of geography in Quebec, but he is one of the sweetest, nicest people you'll ever meet in politics. Quiet, not a big communicator, so he's working on sort of the behind-the-scenes contracts and procurement and government now. So it's a good fit for him, but he's a sweetheart. One of my favorites.
Very quickly, is that rare in politics?
it's rare enough. It's rare enough that he stands distinguished.
All right, let's listen in once again.
Moi, Marie-Claude Bibeau, je promets et jure solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre du Revenu national. Ainsi Dieu me soit en aide.
She's been
Once again, tell us about the new file.
Sorry. So Bibeau has been Minister of Agricultural Affairs and has had a lot of done a lot of work around the dairy industry and around the situation in the United States with export quotas and supply management, etc. She is not well known outside of Quebec. She is primarily a francophone minister in the way some ministers are primarily anglophone ministers. But she's handled the tough Quebec farmers time and time again, and has some international experience around sort of trade treaties and what have you. But she's liked, very competent, but not a very high-profile minister outside of Quebec.
the
Let's
Honourable
listen in
Diane
once
Le
again.
Boutillier, Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard.
Moi, Diane Le Boutillier, je promets et déclare solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre des Pêches, des Océans et de la Garde côtière canadienne. I, Diane Le Boutillier, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully and to the best of my skill and knowledge execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Minister, Fishery and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard.
Since I believe since 2015, she has been in that ministry the entire time. It's not the most glamorous ministry, and most times you're making Canadians angry when you're talking about taxes. but this is actually a step up for her. She's from the Gaspé region of the North Shore of Quebec, and it represents a rural riding. I was saying that's one of the. She doesn't speak English a lot in the House, but she is funny. She's one of these people who only needs to say 2 or 3 words and can make you giggle. She is well respected in Quebec and has a really tricky job now. She'll be out in BC a lot more than she used to be, dealing with the oceries and fishery issues on the West Coast.
And speaking of someone from the West Coast here, let's listen in as we see Minister Harjit Sajjan.
Development Agency of Canada. L'Honorable Harjit S. Sajjan, Président du Conseil privé du droit pour le Canada, Ministre de la Protection civile et Ministre responsable de l'Agence de développement économique du Pacifique Canada.
I, Harjit Singh Sajjan, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as President of the King's Privy Council for Canada and Minister of Emergency Preparedness and Minister responsible for the Pacific Economic Development Agency of Canada.
So Adam Vaughan, several titles there, but most notably for Minister Harjit Sajjan is emergency preparedness.
Yeah, he's a former police officer, had done tours of duty overseas with the Canadian military, certainly in Afghanistan. He's a minister who likes hard work. He's very focused in the way he goes about his work, but he was enjoying being international development minister. He really liked representing Canada on the world stage. He shone in that role. He's going to be a bit more tied to home in this one, and that'll be interesting to see. But he's well respected in cabinet, well respected in Vancouver area as well.
Let's listen back in as they introduce Minister Carla Qualtrough.
I, Carla Qualtrough, I'm close up, sorry, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, wait for it, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Sport and Physical Activity. Moi, Carla Qualtrough, je promets et déclare solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre des Sports et de l'Activité physique. Bravo.
Minister Carla Qualtrough takes over for the Ministry of Sport, another BC representative like the previous Minister Harjit Sajjan Tell us about this new file.
Well, she's a former Olympic athlete in the Paralympics. She was a swimmer for Canada. Her disability is as you can see with the large cards for her swearing in, she has a visual impairment that is why she qualified for the Paralympics. She's moving into a file that's got a lot of tricky places to navigate around sport, pay equity, and you're seeing with the women's soccer team, but also the allegations and the situation in Hockey Canada. So she comes to it with an athlete's perspective. She comes to it as a very competent minister and someone who gets things done quickly.
Let's listen back in as they introduce Minister Karina Gould.
Leader du gouvernement à la Chambre des communes.
I, Karina Gould, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as leader of the government in the House of Commons. Moi, Karina Gould, je promets et déclare solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de leader du gouvernement à la Chambre des communes.
Karina Gould becoming minister. Sorry, hold on one second. What is it? Leader of the government in the House of Commons. Not quite a public role that the public sees, but
in question
an important
period,
role.
She bats sort of clean up for everyone who needs a bit of support or who's in the House for the day. So it's a very political role for her. She's been seen as a minister who is technically very good, but very quiet and in the background a little bit. She had to prevail over the situation with the passport office and the backlog coming out of COVID. But she will be front and center taking on Poilievre, and she handles Poilievre very effectively.
All right.
She is tough to get a quick response passed. She can punch back.
Ahmed Hussein do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully and to the best of my skill and knowledge execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of International Development. Moi, Ahmed Hussein, je promets et jure solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre du Développement international.
So a new file for Minister Ahmed Hussein becoming Minister of International Development. Talk about his expertise in this role and how he'll fit into this role.
I think this one has more to do with the lack of traction the government was getting around its housing investments and the lack of urgency that seemed to be coming out of the department.
Yeah.
The issue has also changed. The first-time buyers and the interest rate hikes have created new headwinds for the government on the housing file, but they want a bigger push there. And
More
I
of a change for the file that he was at versus the file he's going
to. He'd been there for a couple of terms now as housing minister, and I think they were starting to feel the wheels were spinning a bit. He's born in Africa. He's of Somali descent. It'll be interesting to see him work in the new file as someone who's born abroad and came through a refugee experience, and international development touches all those issues. So his life experience should help him in this role.
Minister of Veterans
Let's
Affairs
listen back in
and
as they
Associate
introduce
Minister of
Minister
National
Jeanette
Defense.
Petitpas-Taylor.
Moi, Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor, je promets et jure solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre des Anciens combattants et ministre associé de la Défense nationale. Ainsi Dieu me soit en aide. I, Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truthfully and faithfully, and to the best of my skills and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Veterans Affairs and Associate Minister of National Defense. So help me God.
Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor becomes Minister of Veterans Affairs and Associate Minister of National Defense. I'm still joined by Adam Vaughan. Tell us about this file.
She, formerly with the RCMP before politics, she was in cabinet before, was dropped, and has come back. So for those that got dropped today, perhaps a sign that redemption is possible.
Story here.
That sometimes it's just a temporary moment to the backbench. She comes, as I said, from a policing background and from a military background, and in the Atlantic Canada region in particular, Veterans Affairs is still a very big issue around benefits. So she comes in there with a solid sort of perspective on the file, which is probably why she got it.
Let's listen back in again as they introduce Minister Seamus O'Regan.
I, Seamus O'Regan, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Labour and Seniors. Moi, Seamus O'Regan, je promets et déclare solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités comme m'ont été confiées et qualité de ministre du Travail et des Aînés.
O'Regan adding seniors to his portfolio as Minister of Labour. Lots of work for him in the last couple of weeks with the coach strike happening in Vancouver.
So if the Trudeau government is trying to put a new focus on economics, what this does is it links labor and seniors, which is largely a pension issue, and not just a pension issue, but there's a significant amount of work that needs to be done around protecting private sector pensions as well as public sector pensions, and tying that to labor and the labor and the contracts that often create the pensions is an interesting move, and it changes the way labor is looked at from just workforce development to how do we have a lifelong earning as well as lifelong learning set of strategies, and I'm guessing that's probably why he's found himself in a new combined ministry. Not a usual combination of labor and seniors.
And if labor wasn't enough work, adding another file to that on top of it. Let's listen back in as they introduce Minister Pablo
The Honourable
Rodriguez.
Pablo Rodriguez, Minister of Transport.
Moi, Pablo Rodriguez, je promets et jure solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre des Transports. Ainsi Dieu me soit en aide. I, Pablo Rodriguez, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Transport. So help me God.
Pablo Rodriguez taking over for Omar Alghabra as Minister of Transport. Tell us about this move.
Well, Pablo is one of the Quebec sort of lieutenants in the party. Very strong on the campaign trail, but also someone who used to handle the Bloc Québécois questions with a great deal of sort of style, we shall say. But transportation is a big issue in Quebec. Bombardier is there, SNC-Lavalin, Air Canada. There's a lot of aerospace train and transportation investment that comes out of the province of Quebec. So it sustains his role as a Quebec lieutenant, but it also puts him in charge of airports and high-speed rail in the Quebec Windsor
just an
corridor.
announcement just last week about that.
The Honourable William
Let's listen back in as we continue to be joined by former Liberal Member of Parliament Adam Vaughan after we hear them introduce Minister Bill Blair into a new file. We'll have more to talk about with Adam Vaughan.
I, William Sterling Blair, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Minister of National Defence. So help me God.
We've already talked a lot about Minister Blair taking over defence and both internal and external pressures on this role.
Yeah, there's obviously the war in Ukraine with the Russian aggression that's impacting so many facets of global security. But as well, there's a lot of work to do inside the armed forces. Recruitment is lagging behind our defense needs. And also reform of the culture of what's happening in the military and the armed forces is also one of the issues here to tackle. Things he's done as Chief of Police in Toronto. This is a risk-free appointment in many ways. Bill is a very solid performer. And while he's had a bit of trouble with the convoy and some of the security issues around the Capitol that occurred during that period of time, he's well suited for this role and a safe choice by the Prime Minister.
And leaving the file of public safety going to defense, let's listen in once again.
L'Honorable Mary F. Y. Ng, ministre de la Promotion des Exportations, du Commerce International et du Développement économique.
I, Mary F.Y. Ng, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully and to the best of my skill and knowledge execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Export Promotion and International Trade and Economic Development. Moi, Mary F.Y. Ng, je promets et déclare solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées et collectées des ministres de la Promotion des Exportations, du Commerce International et du Développement économique.
Mary Ng becoming Minister of Export Promotion, International Trade and Economic Development. Adam Vaughan, your thoughts on this new portfolio?
Since coming to Ottawa, she's been around the financial issues, small business in particular, women in small business, she's been a strong voice for. So it's a promotion to sort of the global stage around trade in particular, which if you're refocusing and centering Canada's sort of parliamentary calendar around economics, she'll be playing a role. It's interesting to note that she, Champagne and Freeland walked up the path together today. And it sort of shows where the Prime Minister's head is at in terms of who he trusts to lead those big economic questions, or those global economic questions as they impact Canada.
Global economic questions and domestic economic questions, of course, a big issue for this government moving forward. Let's listen in once again.
Wilkinson, Ministre de l'Énergie et des Ressources naturelles.
I, Jonathan Wilkinson, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully and to the best of my skill and knowledge execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. Moi, Jonathan Wilkinson, je promets et jure solennellement et sincèrement qu'à mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre de l'Énergie et des Ressources naturelles.
We're joined live by Adam Vaughan, former Liberal Member of Parliament, Jonathan Wilkinson, Minister of Energy and Natural Resources.
Yeah, this sort of solidifies his previous portfolio. There's always been a couple of changes. That's why he's had to be signed in. So you'll have to wait for the mandate letter to understand exactly what that means.
Specifics, yeah.
His work is largely focused on developing renewables, but also making sure that the transition from oil and fossil fuels is done in a way that doesn't damage the Western economies, in particular in Alberta and Saskatchewan, but also, of course, Newfoundland. He's trusted in the oil patch. He may not be as aggressively acting in sort of ways that they're totally satisfied with, but it means that the relationships are being sustained, and those relationships with the new Premier in Alberta are critical for stability in that sector and to cover their flank out in Western Canada.
Another major change here, Minister Anita Anand. Let's listen in.
I, Indira Anita Anand, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully and to the best of my skill and knowledge execute the powers and trust reposed in me as President of the Treasury Board. Moi, Indira Anita Anand, je promets et jure solennellement et sincèrement, qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de présidente du Conseil du Trésor.
Anita Anand, procurement during the start of COVID-19, defense for the start of the war in Ukraine, and now Treasury Board. No small file for her ever, it seems.
You wonder what's going to go wrong at Treasury Board now. That's not her fault. She's actually has shown herself as a rookie minister and now as a veteran minister, very competent on very tough files. And she moves to Treasury Board, which for her is probably a bit of a relief out of the spotlight, catch her breath a little bit. She's had a whirlwind of her time while in cabinet. But Treasury Board's critical. If the government's trying to change direction quickly, it means a lot of legislation has to move through Treasury Board quickly. It's the body that sort of fine-tunes spending and legislative initiatives. So she'll be a very important person structurally within government. Won't see her as much publicly anymore, but I can tell you she's one of the most competent and quick studies and effective ministers that Trudeau has, and he's put her in an important spot because of it.
Let's listen in once again as they introduce Minister Mark Miller.
I, Mark Miller, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. So help me God. Moi, Mark Miller, je promets et jure solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre de l'Immigration, des Réfugiés et de la Citoyenneté. Ainsi Dieu me soit en aide.
Mark Miller taking over the immigration file from Sean Fraser. Of course, a lot of attention over the last few weeks with the refugee and asylum seeker issue here in Toronto.
Mark is a very close friend of the Prime Minister, a long-time close friend of the Prime Minister's, but he is also wicked smart. He's a lawyer, also served in the Canadian military as a captain. He is seen as being very quick, very effective, but also someone whose charm is often covered up by some pretty biting commentary. He's a very funny guy. but he's been brought in here to fix the sluggishness of immigration. As an MP, 80% of the work we do is fixing immigration issues. We're doing frontline work on the immigration file. He's been brought in to try and speed that up and change that as we come out of COVID.
And we'll have to be dealing with cities and other areas that deal with money.
Nothing in immigration works well. It's ironic for a country built with immigration. It is painful to pull files forward. Hopefully his military precision and his, as I said, sharp intellect come to bear on that because it needs fixing.
Let's listen in once again.
I, Randy Paul Andrew Boissonneau, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Official Languages. Moi, Randy Paul Andrew Boissonneau, je promets et déclare solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et que je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre de l'Emploi, du Développement de la main-d'œuvre et des langues officielles.
We're still joined live by Adam Vaughan, former Liberal Member of Parliament. Randy Boissonneau becoming Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Official Languages.
So he's from the Francophone community in northern Alberta, but his riding is, of course, Edmonton. The workforce development piece is going to be interesting for him as the transition from to renewable energy from fossil fuels is a huge issue in Alberta, and the just transition of jobs in that space is something which he will have a lot of work to do on that file. He also takes over the Francophonie, which is an important file in Ottawa. But it also shows Francophones across the country that it's not just Quebec driving the language issues in this country, it's also minority language groups right across Canada.
Let's listen in once again as they introduce Minister Sean Fraser.
Andrew Fraser, ministre du Logement, de l'Infrastructure et des Collectivités.
Simon Andrew Fraser, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Moi, Sean Simon Andrew Fraser, j'y promets et déclare solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre du Logement, de l'Infrastructure et de la Collectivité. Merci.
Okay. Housing. I suspect we'll see a lot of Minister Fraser being moved into housing, infrastructure, and communities.
So he used to live in Toronto for a bit, so he's not a stranger to the city. He's the best bagpipe player if there's competition in that area in the house. He's a bit of a musician. He had a lot of fun with the Nova Scotia caucus and the parties they throw. But housing and infrastructure being combined, I think, is the critical thing to look at here. As much of the housing policy as they can pull away from CMHC and put in political hands is going to determine how quickly they can start to solve some of the rental housing issues, the homelessness issues, as well as the challenges for first-time buyers. Linking it with infrastructure and getting into block funding for other governments, including cities, will be one of the first things he has to tackle. But he's got a big hill to climb, and he's luckily a big, tall guy and probably capable of doing that.
One of the biggest files going forward as we see it right now. Let's listen again.
I, Mark Holland, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Health. Moi, Mark Holland, je promets et déclare solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement le pouvoir et je me quitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre de la Santé.
Mark Holland, Minister of Health, and for more details, we're still joined live by Adam Vaughan, former Liberal member of the House of Commons. Your thoughts on this?
Mark Holland's from Ajax. He's been in and out of Parliament. He's had a choppy electoral history in a critical 905 battleground riding. Taking over health, a lot of the hard lifting on health has been done with the accord signed, but coming out of COVID, everything from long-term care to the drug accord and the work that has to be done with New Democrats, which he has been very heavily involved in terms of managing that accord, is now in front of him. So it'll be interesting to see how that relationship he built with the NDP, and particularly Peter Julian, plays out around the delivery of pharmacare and some of the other components of that accord.
Economic Development and
Let's listen in once again.
For the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, l'honorable Gudrid Ida Hutchings, ministre du Développement économique rural et ministre responsable de l'Agence de promotion économique du Canada Atlantique.
Gudrid Ida Hutchings, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Rural Economic Development and Minister responsible for the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agencies. So help me God.
Quite a mouthful for this one. Minister of Rural Economic Development and Minister responsible for the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. Adam Vaughan, your thoughts?
She's a small business operator, runs an outfitting company on the west coast, the northern west coast of Newfoundland, Graham, I get the name wrong, the park up in that neck of the woods. She's a small business operator. Her family used to be a big lumber mill operator on the west coast of Newfoundland. She knows local economics. She is a driver in cabinet. She does not take double talk easily. She is all business all the time, but she has a heart of gold. She's a classic Newfoundland politician in that regard. But she is really focused on developing rural small businesses in Eastern Canada, and she will be a power to be reckoned with. She doesn't back down from a fight.
Let's listen in once again.
I, Double Kara,
do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully and to the best of my skill and knowledge execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Minister of Diversity, Inclusion, and Persons with Disabilities.
Kamal Khera, Minister of Diversity, Inclusion, and Persons with Disabilities. For more, we're continue to be joined by former Liberal Member of Parliament Adam Vaughan.
Mississauga MP. She's a nurse by training. During COVID, she went back and worked in the front lines. In fact, was one of the first members of Parliament to catch COVID, and then had to step away from her role as a parliamentary secretary. She had two very quick deaths in her family and attended a funeral in the States, and it came back to challenge her as someone who was in charge of the travel ban, had a relationship to it. But she is in a ministry where she is there to connect new Canadian and new Canadian citizenship groups to government, and comes from Mississauga, where a significant part of that happens in this part of the world. And it'll be interesting to see what she does with that file. I think what's interesting is that she has continues to move up the ladder, and so she's gained the confidence, that it seems, of the Prime Minister in that regard.
Here's Pascal Saint-Onge. Let's listen in live once again.
Moi, Pascal Saint-Onge, je promets et déclare solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre du Patrimoine canadien. I, Pascal Saint-Onge, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Minister Pascal Saint-Onge moves from sport to Canadian heritage.
She comes out of the public sector union movement in Quebec, and heritage in Quebec often are paired up as a ministry that goes to an MP from the province. She takes on big tech and the challenges that we're having trying to get them to pay advertising bills to support traditional media in Canada. She has to also find ways to protect and make sure local news and all sorts of other communication outfits continue to move forward. She's just come through a pretty tough set of files with Sport Canada and Hockey Canada and some of the issues we talked about with Carla Qualtro's appointment. She's seen as a very smart, very steady voice, but is really, beyond the Hockey Canada file, better known in Quebec than the rest of the country. But heritage matters in Quebec, and those files are going to be tough ones in the fall.
Let's listen in once again.
Le serment des conseillers privés et le serment d'office. Mr. Gary Anna Desangari, Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations. Monsieur Gary Anna Desangari. Ministre des Relations courantes-autochtones.
I, Gary Annan Desangari, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, his heirs and successors. Moi, Gary Annan Desangari, je jure fidélité et sincère allégeance à Sa Majesté le Roi Charles III, Roi du Canada, à ses héritiers et successeurs. I, Gary Annan Desangari, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty's Privy Council for Canada. I will, in all things to be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council, faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be secretly treated of in Council. Generally, in all things I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to do for His Majesty. Moi, Gary Annan Desangari, je jure solennellement et sincèrement que j'agirai en fidèle et loyal serviteur de Sa Majesté le Roi Charles III et ma qualité de membre du Conseil privé de Sa Majesté pour le Canada. J'exprime fidèlement, honnêtement et en toute vérité mon sentiment et mon opinion sur toutes choses traitées, débattues et résolvées en Conseil. Je tiendrai secret tout ce qui me sera confié au révèle en cette qualité, ou tout ce dont il sera traité secrètement en Conseil. Je gérerai en toutes circonstances comme il convient à un fidèle et loyal serviteur de Sa Majesté. I, Gary Annan de Sangre, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truthfully and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations. Moi, Gary Annan de Sangre, je promets et jure solennellement et sincèrement que mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement le pouvoir et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre de la Relation couronne autochtone.
The biggest announcement yet from one of the newest members of Cabinet, Toronto area MP Gary Anandasangari, Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations.
Strong voice from Scarborough. An interesting file. He's in charge of reconciliation, in charge of negotiating and managing both the treaties and the modern treaties, and of course dealing with Indigenous issues as they relate to urban settings as well, which I think is one of the emerging challenges for the federal government. What's interesting, and Olivia Chow should be taking note here, is he's one of the strongest advocates for Scarborough Transit in caucus, and also a very big advocate for the Scarborough Rouge Park. So he carries with him some files that are important to Toronto, and it'll be interesting to see if Olivia Chow, the mayor, or the mayor's office reaches out to him in Scarborough. It's an area where the NDP is competitive. But if she's looking for a voice inside Cabinet, that's probably who she'll be talking to.
Let's listen back in once again as they introduce MP Terry Beach.
I, Terry Beach, do declare that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, his heirs and successors. I, Terry Beach, do solemnly and sincerely declare that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty's Privy Council for Canada. I will in all things to be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be secretly treated of in council. Generally, in all things I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to do for His Majesty. I, Terry Beach, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed to me as Minister of Citizens Services.
Terry Beach becoming Minister of Citizen Services.
Yeah, this is a new ministry. It sounds like it's sort of part of the Service Canada model of frontline services as they face Canadians when you go to get a passport renewed or your taxes filed or whatever way you sort of physically touch the government. He's a West Coaster. He's from Burnaby. He's the neighboring riding to Jagmeet Singh's. He comes from the development sector. He was being looked at, I believe, for housing as well. He is also in a part of BC where the Trans Mountain Pipeline lands, right. And so it's a very tricky issue for them. So he's in cabinet. He's from the west. And he is young and aggressive. He also, I saw, had his two kids there when he first got into Parliament. His first child had some challenges right after being born, and it's nice to see the two young ladies, the two young girls, doing so nicely and being at Rideau Hall today.
And continue to expect some big applause as each of the next ministers is announced, because I believe from here on out, these are all new cabinet ministers. So let's listen back in once again.
A longer oath.
Longer oath
More
as
secrets
well.
to keep.
Yeah.
Canada for the regions of Quebec.
Moi, Soraya Martinez-Ferrada, je déclare fidélité et sincère allégeance à Sa Majesté le roi Charles III, roi du Canada, à ses héritiers et successeurs. I, Soraya Martinez-Ferrada, do declare that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, his heir and successors. Moi, Soraya Martinez-Ferrada, je déclare solennellement et sincèrement que j'agirai en fidèle et loyal serviteur de Sa Majesté le roi Charles III en ma qualité de membre du Conseil privé de Sa Majesté pour le Canada. J'exprimerai fidèlement, honnêtement et en toute vérité mon sentiment et mon opinion sur toute chose traitée, débattue et résolue en Conseil. Je tiendrai secret tout ce qui me sera confié ou révélé en cette qualité, ou tout ce dont il sera traité secrètement en Conseil. J'agirai en toutes circonstances comme il convient à un fidèle et loyal serviteur de Sa Majesté. I, Soraya Martinez-Ferrada, do solemnly and sincerely declare that I shall be true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty's Private Council for Canada. I will in all things be treated, debated, and resolved in private council, faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be strictly treated of in council. Generally, in all things I shall do as a faithful and true servant, although to do for His Majesty. Moi, Soraya Martinez-Ferrada, je promets et déclare solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre du Tourisme et ministre responsable de l'Agence de développement économique du Canada pour les régions du Québec. I, Soraya Martinez-Ferrada, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will be truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skills and knowledge, execute the power and trust reposed in me as a Minister of Tourism and Minister responsible for the Economic Development Agency of Canada for the regions of Quebec. Thank you.
Soraya Martinez-Ferrada becoming Minister of Tourism and Minister responsible for the Economic Development Agency of Canada for the regions of Quebec. We talked about the economic development aspect being a key part here.
Yeah, this is a political job inside Quebec, a very political job. She comes from the east end of Montreal. It's a francophone riding with a large footprint of immigrants. Her family were heavily involved in settling a lot of the South and Central American refugees and immigrants that have arrived in Canada over the last 20, 25 years. Herself, she was born in Santiago, Chile, and so I believe becomes the first Chilean-born cabinet minister in the country's history. But she is very much tied into that experience in the East End of Montreal, and a really smart and strong political operator. She'll be profiled in Quebec much more than the rest of the country.
Adam Vaughan is staying with us throughout this, providing insight. Former Liberal Member of Parliament. He'll continue to stay with us throughout this and provide insight. But for now, let's listen in once again.
I, Ya'ara Sachs, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, his heirs and successors. I, Ya'ara Sachs, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty's Privy Council for Canada. I will in all things to be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council, faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be secretly treated of in council. Generally, in all things, I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to do for His Majesty. I, Ya'ara Sachs, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and Associate Minister of Health.
Minister Ya'ara Sachs becoming Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and Associate Minister of Health. As we mentioned, we talked about the health ministry, of course, not as prolific as we went through the pandemic, but still a lot of things that have to now get the rollout of these issues. What we talked about.
So she takes over Carolyn Bennett's file and represents Toronto in cabinet as well. She has a lot of experience in Israeli politics, and that's where a large part of her work experience comes from. But she's been she's a new MP. She got elected in a by-election. She replaced Michael Levitt up in York Centre, I think it is. We keep changing the names of all the ridings for us old folks, but she takes on an issue which is of extraordinary importance to the city. Mental health and addiction are two of the key drivers in homelessness. And if you're going to solve homelessness, and it's time Toronto did, instead of just manage the crisis, you're going to have to bolster mental health and addiction issues in the housing sector. And she and the new housing minister, Sean Fraser, I would recommend getting together immediately to try and figure out a way to do that. And she could become a very strong ally in Olivia Chow's campaign to reduce homelessness. But as I said, you're not going to end it without those investments, and she's now in charge.
Let's listen in once again.
I, Jenna Sudds, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty, King Charles III, King of Canada, his heirs and successors, so help me God. Moi, Jenna Sudds, je jure fidélité et sincère allégeance à Sa Majesté le Roi Charles III, Roi de Canada, et ses héritiers et successeurs, ainsi de me soit en aide. I, Jenna Sudds, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty's Privy Council for Canada. I will, in all things to be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council, faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be secretly treated of in council. Generally and in all things I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to do for His Majesty, so help me God. Moi, Jenna Sudds, je jure solennellement et sincèrement que j'arrigerai en fidèle et loyal serviteur de Sa Majesté le Roi Charles III, et ma qualité de membre du conseil privé et Sa Majesté pour le Canada. Je exprimerai fidèlement, honnêtement et en toute vérité mon sentiment et mon opinion sur toute chose traitée, débattue et relisue en conseil. Je tiendrai secret tout ce qui me sera confié ou relevé en sa qualité, ou tout ce dont il sera traité secrètement en conseil. J'agirai en toutes circonstances comme il convient à un fidèle et loyal serviteur de Sa Majesté. Ainsi de me soit en aide. I, Jenna Sudds, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Families, Children, and Social Development. So help me God. Moi, Jenna Sudds, je promets et jure solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je me quitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre de la Famille, des Enfants et du Développement social. Ainsi de moi soit en aide.
Jenna Sudds becoming Minister of Families, Children and Social Development. Adam Vaughan, your thoughts?
She's a newcomer. She came in the last election and takes on a riding in suburban Ottawa is probably the reason why Mona Fortier has been displaced. They're trying to sort of bolster their electoral fortunes in and around the Ottawa-Gatineau area. She's seen as an economic minister, a minister whose skill sets are in the sort of the business side or the financial side of government as opposed to the social policy or foreign affairs side. A relatively unknown member of Parliament, but I'm told by colleagues that she was very hardworking in caucus around committees and committee structures, and that must have caught the eye of the Prime Minister as they compose the team for the next election.
And now being given a shot to prove herself on a grander scale, I mean, in caucus, as we go back live for a few more announcements.
Ministre de la Petite Entreprise.
Mabuhay. I, Richie Valdez, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, his heirs and successors. So help me God. Moi, Richie Valdez, je jure fidélité et sincère allégeance à Sa Majesté le Roi Charles III, Roi du Canada, à ses héritiers et successeurs, et ses dieux me soient aidés. I, Richie Valdez, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty Privy Council for Canada. I will, in all things, be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council, faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be secretly treated in council. Generally, in all things, I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to do for His Majesty. So help me God. Moi, Richie Valdez, je jure solennellement et sincèrement que j'agirai un fidèle et loyal serviteur de Sa Majesté le Roi Charles III, en ma qualité de membre du Conseil privé de Sa Majesté pour le Canada. Je m'exprimerai fidèlement, honnêtement et en toute vérité, mon sentiment et mon opinion sur toutes choses traitées, débattues et résolues en français. Je tiendrai secret tout ce qui me sera confié ou révélé en cette qualité, ou tout ce dont il sera traité secrètement et conseillé. J'irai en toutes circonstances comme il convient à un fidèle et loyal serviteur de Sa Majesté, et c'est Dieu me soit en aide. I, Richie Valdez, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to do the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trust repose in me as Minister, Small Business. So help me God. Moi, Richie Valdez, je promets et jure solennellement et sincèrement que mieux de ma compétence et de mes connaissances, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre de la petite entreprise. Ainsi, Dieu me soit en aide.
Well, the most emotion we've seen yet, Richie Valdez becoming Minister of Small Business. Great to see that.
You see it more in the first cabinet after an election with the switch in government, but clearly an emotional moment for her. She she really leaned into the swearing-in ceremonies. It's a portfolio that is important, though, to government. It's very critical to the retail politics side of government. Small businesses are the heart and soul of a lot of communities, big and small, right across the country, and the way they get listened to and the way their issues are dealt with matter a lot to the fabric of our communities. And so it's a job that she has work to do in cabinet, but she also is out on the road a lot, quite a bit as well. So she'll be a busy minister for the next few months. Again, representing a community that is making its first, I believe, into the cabinet circle from the Filipino community, which is an important voting bloc in several cities across the country. They now have someone who can speak directly to that community, and I think that it'll be interesting to see a new MP take on this job and see how she works at it.
And we're seeing right there Arif Virani becoming Minister of Justice as well, so a big file for him.
Parkdale's own.
Being new to the cabinet as well.
And then, again, a downtown cabinet minister, someone that the mayor's office will probably have on speed dial. Justice issues around crime and safety in particular, around sentencing. There's been a sluggish approach to judge appointments, so he has work in front of him. Dave Lametti, who stepped away, was, I thought, a very good, strong justice minister, but the Prime Minister saw things differently.
Seeing the makeup of this new cabinet, overall thoughts?
They have a month of learning in front of them, but they're going to have to hit the ground running on some key files in September. Immigration, housing, of course, but as well, a walk along Queen Street shows you small business and the sluggishness of its comeback after COVID is something which they're going to have to pay attention to. So the economic table has been set. There's some stalwarts that are in place, but there's some new people with new jobs, and we'll have to see what they tackle first as they hit the ground running in September.
That, as we said, as we've talked throughout this, a big issue for this government going forward. Inflation, housing, overall economics as we push to an election, not quite immediate, but as this might be the cabinet face of the next push for voters. So a lot of faces in a lot of new roles here. And some of the big ones that we've talked about, Anita Anand being moved off defense into Treasury Board and Bill Blair into defense. Big changes there as well.
Big changes there, and big changes in terms of Anand taking on a file which is going to be critical to whether or not the government can deliver on its commitments on some of the key economic issues. That'll be interesting to watch. And then, of course, Blair in charge of uniformed public servants is not entirely new,
right?
But he, again, with the war in Ukraine, has big issues on the global stage to attend to.
Adam Vaughan, former Liberal Member of Parliament, thanks so much for being with us to break this all down and to kind of talk about how this government moves forward with this new face of their cabinet.
And with the Reef appointed, it looks like the legislative soccer team will need a new coach.
There we go. Finish on that one.